Most of what we learn in school is what we might call explicit knowledge. The teacher tells you things, and a few weeks go by. And then you tell the teacher the things that your teacher told you, and your teacher says, "Good job," for repeating back to them the things that they told you earlier. Explicit knowledge is knowledge that can be put into words. But underneath all of this explicit knowledge is another kind of knowledge called implicit or tacit knowledge. And it's this kind of knowledge that drives a lot of learning forward. So that is what we are going to explore in this video. And to give you an example of what I mean, I want you to do a little experiment right now, but it's going to require that you pause the video and leave your computer. Here's what I want you to do. Take out a piece of paper and a pencil and walk away from your computer. And then write down the arrangement of keys on your keyboard. Now don't look at your computer, just close your computer or walk away and draw your keyboard from scratch. You ready? I'm gonna do it too. Are you back? Okay, so take a look at what you drew and compare it to the actual keyboard. These are my results. This is what I know explicitly, but my ability to touch type is an example of tacit knowledge. I don't explicitly know where every key is on my keyboard, but somewhere in my brain or body, I must know where they are because I can touch type fairly accurately. But this is not the only form of tacit knowledge. I'm going to be talking about 3 different kinds of tacit knowledge. The first kind we might call weak tacit knowledge. There are lots of times when we could explain something to someone, like it would be possible for us to explain, but it wouldn't be nearly as efficient as learning from some other method. Think about learning a specific dance routine without seeing someone do the dance for you. All you get is an explanation. Put your left arm and leg forward, then move them simultaneously to the side with your foot pointed and your hand cupped. Then move your arm above your head and your leg behind you, also with your foot pointed. Then move your arm back down, tilt your head, and touch the heel of your left foot to the toe of your right foot. Then do the whole movement again. Now you could probably learn a dance this way, but I'm willing to bet that the dance that you come up with is going to be quite different than the dance that the choreographer had in mind. Think about how much more efficient it is just to see the dance and imitate it. Choreographers do explain things from time to time, but that's more to supplement the main channel of instruction, which is through observation, imitation, and correction. Notice how much this sentence doesn't say. How far forward do you put your leg? How quickly do you move them to the side after you move them forward? How cupped is your hand? How far behind you do you move your leg? How much do you tilt your head? How quickly do you perform the whole movement? Now you could explain all of the answers to these questions and then explain the answers to any questions that came up from the previous round of answers, and maybe finally the student has a pretty precise idea of how to do the dance. It's just more efficient to observe and imitate someone. You don't have to even use any verbal descriptions or think explicitly about what you're doing. You just have to copy their body movements. Another flavor of weak tacit knowledge relates to the idea of expert blindness. When we become experts at something, we start to perceive things differently. As we learn how to cook, we stop seeing recipes as a lengthy series of instructions, and we start to chunk them into larger actions. What was once effortful and difficult has become automatic, something we don't really think about anymore. If you know how to read English, your brain can't help but parse English words. You can't go back in time to perceiving the words like you used to perceive them before you knew how to read English. And this is part of the reason why experts do not necessarily make great teachers. A baker, for instance, has already chunked the idea of creaming butter and sugar together. But someone who doesn't bake doesn't necessarily know what creaming sugar and butter together means, and doesn't necessarily know when to stop creaming together or when it looks good or not. There's a gap if the baker doesn't know that the student might be interpreting her instructions incorrectly because he's ignorant of some other fact. The same thing can happen in math or medicine or science or chess or any complicated domain. In these cases, the knowledge could be made explicit, just like we talked about with the choreographer. If the teacher knew what the student didn't know, then the teacher could explain it. But it gets more complicated because often the student themselves does not know what they don't know, and the teacher doesn't know that they don't know it either. And so you have two people that both don't know what the important missing piece of knowledge is. The expert has some tacit knowledge, something that's bottled up in their mind that isn't getting transmitted or passed on to the student. Okay, on to tacit knowledge type number 2. Remember that keyboard experiment that we did earlier? Well, that was an example of something we might call body knowledge. Because of the way that our brains and bodies work, we can know how to do something without being able to explain how to do something. The classic example is with bike riding. No one learns how to ride a bike through explanation. When the bike is approximately 2 degrees to one side, lean in the opposite direction to keep the bike upright. If you want to turn left, lean slightly right first, then turn the wheel. It's not just that we don't learn how to ride a bike through explanation, it's that we can't learn how to ride a bike through explanation. Reading a bunch of formulas on the physics of bike riding is not going to help anyone learn how to ride a bike. Maybe a robot could make use of these explicit instructions with the right sensors and the right cameras and everything. But for us, we can't translate those words and formulas into meaningful actions. We can still use words to help people learn how to ride a bike, but it has to happen in a slightly different way. So we can tell someone, learn to balance first, and then start to use the pedals. This is a second order kind of instruction. It doesn't directly teach you how to ride a bike, but it tells you how to sequence your experiences in a way to make learning easier. This body knowledge or brain knowledge is very, very efficient. There's no conscious thought required. It's just automatic responses. With a bike, we learn to ride in a mostly tacit way, and after we learn, we also bike ride in a mostly tacit way. But a very common path is for things to start off as explicit and slowly become more tacit over time. That's how learning to drive usually works. When we're learning to drive, we receive a lot of explicit instructions. Put your feet and your hands here. Brake, but not that fast. Know where your blind spot is. Watch out for cars running red lights at the end of the light. But over time, our behaviors become more and more automated until you get to the point where you don't really think about them at all. What was explicit becomes implicit. The tacit knowledge that we've talked about so far can still be explained in principle. We can explain the dance routine, it's just not efficient. We can explain how to ride a bike, but it doesn't help us learn how to ride a bike. Is there a kind of tacit knowledge that can't even be explained in principle? The philosopher Harry Collins argues that there is, and I tend to agree with him. I'm going to call this social tacit knowledge, and to explain it, I want to talk about learning Chinese. So there's a famous thought experiment originally proposed by John Searle. Imagine there is a person in a room who has access to an unbelievably large database of every single English sentence and their Chinese equivalents. We send an English sentence or a paragraph into this room, and this person can look up the equivalent Chinese translation and send the translation back to us. So one of the questions you can ask about this experiment is, does the person in the room know Chinese? We might say, no, not really, because the database is doing all the work. But what about the person and the database together? Do they as a unit understand Chinese? This is a harder question, but I think the answer is still no. And one of the reasons comes back to tacit knowledge. To know a language means to be a part of a language community. Languages are not static things. They change all the time based on our interactions with each other. There are new words with new meanings. There are old words that take on new meanings. There are words that we don't use anymore, and maybe meanings that we don't even use anymore. Different grammatical structures become more generally accepted. And everywhere there are shades of meaning rising and falling and changing. So any database, even granting that it has every single English phrase, would have to be updated constantly by someone who actually knew the language, someone who was a part of the language community. So we can say at best that the person inside this room knows the Chinese language at one particular moment in time. But because they are not taking part in the social aspect of a language community, their knowledge quickly becomes outdated. Now, I just said that the language database would have to be updated by a native speaker, but does any native speaker understand the language completely? No, I don't think so. Language is a kind of collectively created and maintained thing. No one person knows all of the meanings and all of the implications of every word and every sentence. In fact, a lot of the meaning is conveyed through context. So there is a sense in which we all share large parts of this collective language without any one person understanding it completely. A lot of things are like language. Driving is like language. When we drive, a lot of what we are doing is responding to our expectations about what other people are going to do. Now, I live in Taiwan, where the driving habits and customs are very different than they are in the US. And from what I understand, the habits and customs today are very different than they were in Taiwan 30 years ago. What exactly your expectations of other drivers are at any given time is hard to say, but it's easy to know if you live here and experience it. The common thread among all these varieties of tacit knowledge is how you learn it. We learn tacit knowledge through experience. Either a hands-on kind of experience, whether that's learning to ride a bike or learning a new dance routine, or a social kind of experience, like collaborating on a project or observing other people's behaviors. I can't end this video without again mentioning Harry Collins. This video is basically a recapitulation of the ideas in his book, Explicit and Tacit Knowledge, which is a good read. It's also a bit of a challenging read. He also talks about a lot more things than I have talked about in this video. I should say that what I presented here is not the only way of thinking about tacit knowledge, but I think it's a pretty good start. For more about different kinds of knowledge, check out this video here, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.